Brooke didn't knock. She opened the door to Ridge's office like a woman who had run out of time and patience, like someone who knew the room better than the man sitting in it. He looked up with the weary caution he saved for her, that old mix of attraction and reflexive defense, and she closed the door behind her with care, as if shutting out the roar of Los Angeles could muffle the noise in both their chests. "Come with me," she said, before he could finish her name. "Tonight." No speeches, no meetings, no polite endings. We can end this cycle our way, by walking away from it. He rubbed a hand across his jaw and didn't stand. "Brooke, don't Brooke me like I'm a stranger." She crossed the room and parked herself on the edge of his desk, crowding the sketches and rulers that had always been safer than feelings. "You still love me. You know it. I know it. You don't have to keep pretending that. That charity project you're doing with Taylor is love. It isn't. You pity her, Ridge. That's not a marriage. That's not a life." The words hung there, too sharp to ignore, too true, at least to her, to walk back. Ridge didn't argue. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed, and let the silence try to talk him out of what she'd just said. It didn't work. Brooke softened, reached to brush an invisible crease off his sleeve. "You've always been my person. We lose ourselves, we find each other, and the world calls it drama. But it's us. It's always been us." He flinched at the word pity, not because it was unfair, but because it made a map out of a feeling he hadn't wanted to read. He could list 1,000 noble reasons for staying the course with Taylor, the years, the children, the healing she deserved, but every noble reason trembled in the corner when Brooke looked at him like that, when her voice carried that mix of command and plea he'd never learned to resist. "You think I don't care about Taylor?" he asked, but his voice lacked the weight of a challenge. "I think you care like a good man cares," Brooke said, steady. "But you don't love her like you love me. And she knows it, even if she can't face it. I'm not here to hurt her. I'm not trying to win a game. I'm asking you to stop lying to yourself before you lie to everyone else." Ridge stood at last, the chair's wheels scraping the floor. He paced behind the desk, then abandoned it and joined her in the space where work ended and life began. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. The air did the touching. "If I go with you," he said, "I'm not coming back to this limbo. I'm not going to juggle you and Taylor like some coward who feeds on chaos." "If you go with me," Brooke said, eyes bright, "you'll remember what happiness feels like. We'll stop apologizing for gravity." He thought of Taylor's steadiness, the calm she had insisted he deserved, the safety that had almost hypnotized him into mistaking quiet for joy. He thought of Brooke's hurricanes and sunlight, of the way she could shake him awake with one raised eyebrow. He thought of the years they had stolen and the years they had ruined, and how somehow those were the same years. He hated the word that kept circling back, pity. He couldn't deny it. It wasn't a flame. It was a blanket. And it was heavy. "Europe," he heard himself say, as if the word had been waiting in his mouth for weeks. "We disappear for a while. No phones, no press, no family. We figure us out without an audience." Brooke's smile was an answer he'd been starving for. She took his hand. "Tonight. I'll make the arrangements. You pack a bag with things you don't mind never seeing again, because I swear to you, we're not coming back the same." He didn't ask for more time. He didn't ask for permission. And he didn't call Taylor. He told himself he would. He told himself he'd sit across from her and explain that the life she wanted with him was a future he couldn't live in, that his heart had always belonged to another set of blue eyes and another kind of storm. But he knew the truth. He wasn't brave enough to watch Taylor accept it with grace. He wasn't cruel enough to demand her blessing. So he chose the coward's path that looked like decisiveness, the one paved with airport tiles and the promise of distance. Evening wrapped Los Angeles in gray and gold as Brooke moved through her house like a woman preparing for a holiday she'd been promised as a child and denied as an adult. She packed quickly linen shirts, silk dresses that breathed on European streets, the perfume that Ridge always noticed before he saw her. She left notes for her children that said little and said everything. I love you. I need to do this. Trust me. She was giddy in the way that terrified her because it felt like tempting fate, like daring the universe to sweat her down for wanting too much. She loved him. He loved her. She couldn't bear to say it out loud to the walls in case they echoed it. Across town, Ridge stood in his bedroom with a half-open suitcase and a mind full of unfinished conversations. He kept seeing Taylor's face, the clear eyes that had forgiven him too many times. He searched for the lie that could make it easier and found none. He told himself he would call from the gate. He told himself he would write a letter from Paris. He told himself 1,000 gentle stories about timing and destiny and the right to chase happiness. They were stories he'd mock in anyone else. They met in the dark on a side street thick with jacaranda blossoms, the kind that fell like confetti on cars that didn't ask to be celebrated. Brooke was electric. Ridge was charged by proximity. They got into the car that felt borrowed from a life no one had cleared for takeoff yet. The driver made small talk Brooke barely heard, a buzz under the drumbeat in her chest. She watched the city glide by and saw every street as an escape route and a memory lane at once. She kept thinking, "This is the last time we will drive to an airport as two people trying to be one. Next time will be one trying to stay one." She stole glances at Ridge and found him looking back, and for a few blocks they forgot the world existed. The sound was small at first. A complaint buried under the hum of the engine. A hiccup of something not right. Ridge frowned, listened harder, and the driver glanced at the dashboard with practiced calm. "Probably nothing," he said, the phrase that had introduced disasters forever. The smell followed, faint, metallic, like a wire heating under a rug. Brooke felt it before she named it. She straightened, then put a hand on Ridge's arm as if anchoring him could steady the car. The driver eased toward the shoulder, hazard lights winking like a joke they weren't in on. The noise sharpened. Heat swelled under their feet. The first lick of flame was not a movie flame. It was meaner and less colorful, a suggestion of fire that turned into a fact too quickly. "Out," Ridge said, calm in the way of men who have learned to fake it for people they love. The driver was already fumbling with his belt. Brooke's door resisted, stubborn, then suddenly free. She swung it open to night air that felt too thin. She moved to climb out and caught the strap of her bag on the seat latch, a small, stupid delay, the kind that you'd swear couldn't kill you. Ridge was out first, then turning back, because of course he turned back. He leaned in as the heat breathed harder. Brooke. Her name was a command and a prayer. The car coughed, and the cough became a roar, the kind that erases thought. Ridge grabbed for her arm, and she was halfway free and then not, the strap an enemy, the car a trap. The driver shouted something that didn't matter. Metal popped like bones. Ridge pulled with everything he had and hated every second of physics that argued with him. The fire took a breath. The world held one with it. And then it was too late. It didn't look like television. There were no elegant flames licking at paint. There was noise and heat and an ugly brightness that swallowed edges. Ridge fell backward, thrown by heat and helplessness, and the night buckled. People would later call it an accident, and that word would make him want to tear through walls because it sounded like a shrug. It sounded like no one's fault, which felt like no one's truth. He heard the sirens before he understood he was screaming. He ran at the fire again because love makes cowards brave and brave men stupid, and hands dragged him back, and he fought them, and he lost. The car collapsed into itself, a star dying on a street in Los Angeles, and Brooke, who had mastered every room she entered, did not walk out of this one. When the paramedics reached Ridge, he was on his knees, skin already singing with burns he would never forget, clothes scorched into patterns he would remember as a map to the worst moment of his life. They wrapped him, shouted orders at each other with the economy of people who live in emergencies, and he tried to tell them her name. He kept saying Brooke, like it was a password that could unlock time. He didn't remember the ambulance slamming its doors or the world turning into siren and light. He remembered the smell. He remembered his own voice, a stranger in his throat. And he remembered thinking, with a clarity that cut, I didn't even say goodbye to Taylor. News travels through Los Angeles the way heat travels through metal, fast, inevitable, indifferent to who gets burned. The first call to the Forresters came from a station manager who owed a favor and wanted to pay it with a warning. There had been a car fire near the airport. A driver and a man pulled out, a woman still inside. Names were forming. Eric dropped his glass and didn't hear it break. Donna covered her mouth and said Brooke's name like a mantra to call a spirit back. Katie felt the floor tilt and reached for the counter with a hand that missed. Hope heard accident and car and airport and only realized she was on the ground when someone lifted her up, their words a soft static that meant stand, breathe, hold on, hold on. Taylor was with Steffi when the call hit, and the room changed weather. Ridge, Steffi said, and Taylor squeezed her hand with a calm she summoned from the part of herself that had walked families through nights like this. She was a doctor. She knew the voice to use, the questions to ask. She did not, for a long minute, let herself ask the only one that mattered to her. Why was Brooke with him? The hospital was bright and colorless, the kind of place that tried to paste order over chaos with light. Ridge arrived in a blur of motion and voice, and the words severe burns landed like verdicts. Surgeons took him. Nurses took his name and gave promises they couldn't keep but had to offer. He slid under a world of medicine where hours dissolved and time was measured in numbers on machines. He was sedated enough to stop fighting the hands that wanted to keep him alive. He was awake enough to dream with his eyes half open, Brooke's face flickering like a film that wouldn't thread. When the families converged, they did so with the speed of people who had memorized the route to this particular nightmare. Forrester, Logan, Spencer. Names that had been allies and rivals in boardrooms and living rooms became roles in a waiting room where money didn't matter and pride had no use. The first question on everyone's lips was Ridge's condition. The second, hidden, pushed down, then rising like air, was Brooke. A doctor, careful and tired, delivered what he could. Ridge had burns on his arms, chest, the side of his face. He would need grafts. He was stable enough for now, that fragile word. As for Brooke, the doctor paused. I'm sorry. Words became a blur after that. Brooke Logan, who had survived every scandal and storm the city could invent, who had returned from heartbreaks like a champion from a tunnel, who had made lovers repent and rivals reconsider, did not get a third act. Katie folded, Donna keened. Hope made no sound at all, and that silence was worse. Eric sat down because his body refused to hold him up. Bill turned away and put a fist through a vending machine, then apologized to a nurse like a man who knew apologies were worthless currency here. Taylor stood very still. It wasn't numbness, it was precision. A mind like hers had been trained to hold facts under pressure. She held this one until it burned. Brooke was gone. Ridge had been with her. They had been on their way out of the country. Europe, Hope whispered when she could form syllables. She said she needed a break, a reset. She couldn't look at Taylor. She couldn't not. The room took in the geometry of the triangle that had drawn blood for decades, and for once no one had the appetite to analyze it. Grief ate everything. Steffi wrapped her arms around Taylor, a daughter trying to be taller than the height of this pain. Taylor's eyes filled and finally spilled. She wasn't crying for a rival. She was crying for a woman she had stood next to through weddings and wars, a woman who had wanted the same man and raised children who shared the same table, a woman who had been infuriating and tender and alive. She cried because the story had ended in heat and metal, not in therapy or closure. When Ridge surfaced, it was into a world lined with white curtains and beeping machines, and the feeling that his skin didn't fit. The pain was a live thing they were trying to cage with drugs. He moved and the world pushed back. He tried to speak and heard gravel. Taylor was there first, because fate has a sense of timing both cruel and exact. She stood where he could see her without turning his head. "You're here," he said, shocked by his own voice. "Of course I'm here," she answered, and her voice didn't shake. She had learned to speak inside earthquakes. He searched her face for accusation, and found none he deserved, which was its own punishment. "I'm sorry," he said, and those two words did what fire hadn't. They seared straight through him. We were, I know," she said. The truth was in the room with them, sitting at the foot of the bed like a guide no one had invited. "Rest. There will be time for everything that needs saying. Not now." He closed his eyes because gratitude hurt, and because every time he tried to see Brooke he saw light. When he opened them again, hope was there too, fingers clenched around a paper cup she didn't seem to realize she was crushing. "Dad," she said, a name she used when she needed him to remember what he still was to someone. He reached for her without thinking and winced when the motion pulled at bandages. She leaned in anyway. "Mom," the word cracked. He swallowed what was left of the world. "I tried," he said. It was the only sentence he had. "I know," she said, because it was the only sentence that could reach him. In the halls, conversations built like storms, then broke like waves. Why were they together? Why hadn't someone known? Why didn't fate pick a quieter lesson? Eric called the family lawyer out of habit, then hung up because no contract could be drafted against this. Bill offered planes, security, whatever could be offered when there was nothing to fix. Donna tried to call a clergy member whose number she hadn't used since a wedding that hadn't stuck, then stopped and decided to sit with Katie instead, to count breaths. Steffi and Thomas fought in whispers about what to tell the children, then remembered they were not children and deserved the truth. Somewhere in the city, tabloids began to pulse with the kind of heat they preferred, and for once, the families didn't care enough to preempt spins. They cared about a man in a bed and the shape of a woman they couldn't bury yet because paperwork and procedure were efficient where hearts were not. Night gave way to a gray morning, and the hospital filtered light into sterile shapes. Ridge slept and woke and slept again, each time carrying a few more shards of memory to the surface. He saw Brooke in her doorway, wind in her hair that wasn't there. He saw the bag strap that had snagged life and held it for 1 second too long. He saw fire blooming like a cruel flower. He saw Taylor looking at him without judgment and wanted to crawl out of his skin from the weight of it. When the doctor explained graphs and timelines and the tyrannies of healing, Ridge listened like a man taking notes in a class he hadn't enrolled in. Pain had rules. He would follow them. Guilt had no rules, and he didn't know where to begin. The question of Europe turned to ash with everything else. Brooke had treated it like a promise with jet fuel in it. She had spoken of cafes and back streets where they could be ordinary, of mornings that didn't start with a press release, of nights that didn't end with an argument interrupted by a knock. She had said she wanted simple happiness. The universe had answered with a reminder that simple wasn't for people like them. Plans were made because the living insist on structure. The family began to talk about a memorial that could hold a woman who refused to be held. Brooke had loved big and loud. The service could not be quiet. And yet, the idea of cameras made everyone sick. Katie wanted a beach. Donna wanted music Brooke actually danced to. Hope wanted to speak and also wanted to never say another word again. Ridge wanted to disappear, but the world had different plans. Taylor, without fanfare, began to handle the tasks that broke other people. She made calls. She listened when a funeral director spoke in the practiced tone of someone who sanded grief into lists. She told Steffi to take care of her brother and not the news. She told Thomas to sit with Hope when the room felt like a vacuum. She told everyone to drink water. And when she was alone, she let herself lean against a wall and feel the tremor run through her like an aftershock. People said ridiculous things because that's what people do near loss. They said at least Ridge survived like survival was a consolation trophy you could polish. They said Brooke would want everyone to be strong, as if desire could deputize. They said accidents happen, the same way people say rain falls, ignoring that rain drowns. The families nodded politely at kindness and saved their anger for the silence. In the bed that had become a stage for his reckoning, Ridge rehearsed conversations with a woman he would never get to face. He apologized for every time he'd left and every time he'd come back. He admitted he had always measured other loves against hers and found them lacking. He told her that pity was worse than hatred because it looked like love from a distance and spoiled like milk up close. He told her he had chosen her, finally and fully, and the universe had snatched the choice out of his hands like a toy from a child. He told her that if she was anywhere, she knew the truth he hadn't been brave enough to say out loud in time. He told her he would carry her, and he knew the carrying would be heavy. The day the press got the official story, the headlines were neat and merciless. CR fire claims Brooke Logan. Ridge Forrester hospitalized. The words did what headlines always do. They flattened, trimmed, simplified. The comments sections, those rooms filled with strangers holding torches and opinions, tried to frame the story as karma, drama, fate. The people who loved Brooke didn't read them. They put one foot in front of the other and tried to move through air that felt like glass. Ridge's recovery would be a map traced with pain, surgeons said. He could follow it and end up on a shore where life resembled itself again, even if the mirror had changed. He could go home. He could work. He could sit in rooms with people who said his name like it was both a question and an answer. What he could not do, they did not have medicine for. He could not undo a choice made in a rush of hope and a cloud of exhaust and a spark no one could explain.